Howdy, folks, and welcome to your storm chasing forecast show for Friday, June 5th. I'm Gabriel Harber, and I'm joined here by Coach Cameron Nixon. Cameron, how you doing today, man?
I'm actually doing pretty great. Thank you for having me on again, Gabe.
Absolutely. The viewers deserve a reprieve after they were forced to watch me fly solo a couple of days ago. I didn't even bother asking for feedback from the rest of the coaches because I didn't want to embarrass myself, but that was the break glass in case of emergency option that I had
Yes.
to put into play. But thankfully, we are back here with someone who is an expert of the craft. We've got a really interesting chase day coming up here for you folks. And Cameron, you were just telling me that you actually wish you were out there actually chasing because you think this kind of looks like a very sneaky day in terms of the potential upside.
Yeah, I'd be lying if I didn't have just a little bit of an urge. You're probably looking at the forecasting. It's a fairly marginal kind of chase day. And I very well think it might end up being one. However, I think the ceiling for today might be a little bit higher than in days past, and I'll get into that a little bit.
One of the notes that you have here for today's setup is that we could have a Nebraska-Kansas boom bust play out there. And maybe if you could take a second and just share with folks exactly what you mean when you talk about a play that has boom bust potential or high risk, high reward, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think, and I will, on the scale of boom to bust, how likely each is, I think I'm probably going to hedge toward bust, but I think the boom is particularly interesting. Really, what I mean by this is I think both spectrums of the kind of chase day are very possible. I see some environmental soundings and some storm morphologies that remind me of pretty interesting tornadoes in the past. And then I also see a pretty solid potential that we'll just get some marginal thunderstorms. So it's pretty tough to say exactly what's going to happen, but I think your mileage may vary.
And that question was a little bit of leading the witness because I really just wanted an opportunity to, and I'm sure those of you who have listened to my stuff before will roll your eyes and say, Gaby's at it again. But I just find trading and storm chasing, trading markets, to be so
There we go.
similar because you're oftentimes trying to structure things so that you don't necessarily win half the time, a majority of the
Yeah.
time, but that you have an asymmetric risk reward ratio. And so when
Mm,
you tell me that you're seeing some analogs that are giving you some sneaky big day vibes, I'm not
yeah.
so much looking at, hey, this is only a slight risk, hey, this is only a 2% tornado probability. I'm thinking to myself, if only one out of every 10 or one out of every 20 of these setups play out, first of all, I'll be one of the few chasers out there. So that means I'm not
Yep.
going to have to deal with chaser convergence. And second of all, if
Yep.
your thing is getting the pictures, getting the videos that you can have memories forever or maybe even sell to media, these are definitely the kind of days where you'll have less competition in terms of your
100%.
YouTube videos and brokers and all that stuff.
Couldn't have said it any better.
All right, so I'm done. This show isn't about me. We're talking about the forecast. Let's go ahead and dive into exactly what you are seeing there on the Nebraska-Kansas border area.
Yes. We're dealing with, finally, some zonal moderate flow. And for those who know classic June days, this is what you want. We don't want these highly amplified big troughs, and we also don't want this. I don't even know what this is in the Southern Plains. We want something like this. And today we finally have this. So that this is already something that gets me a little bit excited. You could see some kind of an enhancement from the Kansas-Nebraska border up to the upper Midwest here. 35 to even 45 knots of shear will be plenty, or knots of flow up here will be plenty, and we can actually look at our wind shear, so we're not just guesstimating. But going on toward the afternoon, we have a little bit of boundary dynamics in play. And we're going to have a little bit of backed flow around these boundaries and give us probably upwards of 30, 35 knots of shear and throughout this kind of target area. So I think that's definitely plenty. Surface wise, we're dealing with kind of this broad kind of banana low as the high plains bake here east of the Rockies. Will really increase our temperatures and we'll get this low pressure to form here. But we have this kind of surface trough from here all the way up into the upper Midwest. You could see this discontinuity especially well in dew points, especially up in the kind of Midwest area, where you have this subtle wind shift going pretty much all throughout the outlook. You can even see in the Kansas, Nebraska area some of this kind of wraparound moisture as our low pressure strengthens here in western Kansas. So you're getting some of these high dews that have been sitting in Kansas for so long to actually spill north of this front. And I think that's what is definitely interesting me in this area. So we'll look up some CAPE and we'll see how these dew points contribute to potentially extreme instability across this area. We have upwards of, I guess I'll have to pluck a sounding here, probably upwards of 4,000 CAPE in this area. We see upwards of 5,000 surface-based CAPE. I'm not exactly sure if we're going to get that 75 dew point north of the front, but some of these CAPE profiles I'm seeing are pretty ridiculous. And combined with just enough shear, I think things could get fairly interesting. And I'll go into the dynamics more about how this might play out later.
You know, Cameron, one of my favorite things about you is actually going back to earlier when you were first starting off with the analysis where you said you didn't know what was going on down there in Texas.
Yeah.
For someone whose opinion so many people respect so much, including myself, I actually just love how often you're willing to say I don't know about stuff. I'm just not really sure. I just don't know. And to me, that's such a sign of expertise that you're comfortable with just passing by the stuff that you don't know or don't feel comfortable talking about.
Yeah, if I'm not honed in on an area or paying attention to it, I'll let you know. Like I've done my research on these two targets, but yeah, that's just how it goes.
It's a big atmosphere out there. There's a lot going on.
Yes, I agree.
All right, so as far as this Nebraska-Kansas play is concerned, were there any other points that you wanted to highlight before we moved on to the more hipster play up north?
Yeah, so let me break down how I think this could evolve and failure modes and also potential, I guess, boom modes that we could have. And I'll flip to the NAM here for a depiction of what this interface might look like around this boundary. You see south of this boundary, this kind of slowly sagging stationary front, we get mixing. A lot of our dews mix out, and we have this generally well-mixed air mass. Can pluck a sounding over here. You'll see probably fairly high LCLs and pretty weak shear. Lots of dry air here, aloft here too. So pretty unlikely you get convection initiation in this kind of air mass. However, when you have these dews spill just to the north of the boundary, you get this pretty localized area, this ribbon of really high CAPE. And you can see here, even with 68 dew points here, we have a lot of instability, especially in the low and mid levels, almost 5,000 CAPE here. And you get enhanced shear because our surface flow is flipped to northeasterly north of that front. So in the past, there have been interesting tornado setups that kind of followed this pattern. The Wellfleet tornado from last year had a very similar surface pattern. The Felt, Oklahoma tornado from June 8th last year also followed this pattern. And is this saying that these are going to happen? No, absolutely not. There's also a lot of failure modes. If you potentially over-convect west here into this more well-mixed air mass, I'm expecting this to show a little bit higher LCLs and maybe weaker shear. Doesn't look absolutely supportive of convection, but if your surface forcing is a little bit too strong in this kind of well-mixed air mass, you're going to potentially over-convect. And this is a pretty good sounding for convection. That's again the convection that you don't want. So it's very possible that a lot of this convection just ends up being high base garbage. Might even try to initiate an interesting storm or a supercell here in southern Nebraska, and then this convection runs into it. So I'll play what I think this morphology might look like. And I'm assuming the NAM will have this. But let's say you want to initiate a storm right here on that triple point, and then you have all this crap vection here initiating west that runs into it and then just kind of blows it up, as we've been talking a lot about this week. That's a decent possibility. However, it's also possible that you have a storm or cluster that lasts long enough here on that triple point to produce a fairly photogenic tornado before it gets overrun. So that's the ceiling of what I expect could actually happen.
Now, with that photograph you pulled up in that you called it a ribbon of moisture that was kind of spilling over,
Yeah,
it looked like that might have some deviant tornado potential in there.
it's possible. It's really hard to tell once you're dealing with these boundary interactions. But yeah, with this photograph, you could expect maybe tornadoes start moving in weird ways. Actually, this would kind of support that if we had a southwesterly moving tornado. But I kind of just chalked these boundary interactions up to who knows. I think storms will be largely stationary, which is another reason why I'd love to chase it if I was closer. But yeah.
You also named Wellfleet, which in our Discord server is kind of like shouting fire in a crowded movie theater.
I
They're
know.
gonna go absolutely bonkers for that, so I appreciate
Yep.
the. I'm gonna have to clean it up and deal with it, but
Yeah.
looks like it's gonna be a pretty interesting day out there. You really caught my attention with the stationary storms. That seems like a good opportunity to just kick your feet up, relax, and enjoy some Mother Nature.
Yep. Yep. Again, I think my gut instinct tells me things will probably bust, but I just feel like I gotta sound that watch. Maybe not the alarm, but the watch that something silly is definitely possible here.
I feel like busts are more tolerable though when you didn't have to break your neck flying at crazy speeds trying to keep up with storms,
Oh
putting
yeah,
a put a ton
sure.
of strategic effort into it so that you're exhausted at the end of the day. When you just kind
Yeah,
of get to hang out with friends and play on your phone and look up at
yeah,
the sky and just chill, it's a little more
yeah,
tolerable. So I totally get what you're saying there. So the Iowa Minnesota play is not one that probably a lot of people are looking at, but you do have it down as the hipster play of the evening. What are we thinking
yeah.
about up there?
Yeah, so I think we still have some pretty robust dew points that will work their way up there. And we have that kind of old front, really slow moving stationary front working its way down there. And I think this could trigger some storms. And the buoyancy profiles I was noticing in this moisture rich air mass were actually pretty interesting. If I do our 0 to 3 kilometer cape, Iowa loves its 3 cape, and you can see a lot of that here later on in the afternoon. So we could just pluck a random sounding, maybe in southern Minnesota, ahead of this front. And it's all going to depend on where this front is going to be. But this sounding to me, knowing Iowa climatology of tornado events, actually fits the bill. We have really almost extreme low-level cape here, even with our 70 dew point. And we have just enough bulk shear perpendicular to that boundary that at the minimum we'll get some kind of supercell action, I think, along the front there. And I don't think there's really the potential that they grow upscale because as we saw, that boundary was quite diffuse. But at maximum, I do think a tornado potential could be realized up there if you have a couple discrete supercells up there. These will probably be minis, owing to our really weak shear and low LCLs. These are environments that tend to give us mini supercells. This is what Iowa really and Minnesota excel in tornado production.
Two things I want to mention real quick. You were talking about 3 Cape and Trey Greenwood, our lead coach at Storm Chaser Coaching. He just actually recorded a group coaching session about specialized types of cape, and I believe 3 Cape is one of the ones that he discussed in there. That should be
Yes.
coming out on the YouTube channel within the next couple of days. I know our team is editing it up right now. And if you click that join button for our channel membership down below this video, you'll get access to that. It'll show up in your subscriber feed, it'll show up in your suggested videos or whatever once that video releases. We've got a lot of other awesome videos in there that you can watch right now as well. Cameron, you have two presentations on skew tees, I believe, which are really cool that people
Yes.
are going to want to check out. If you're looking at all these numbers and lines and stuff on his screen when we're doing these forecast shows and you're wondering what all that means, his two presentations and the ones he's going to do in the future are absolutely going to give you all the tools you need to learn how to analyze all of this like a pro. Other thing I'll mention is that this is the WeatherFront browser app that Cameron is using right now, just recently released. In fact, we
And
did just have a
I love
show.
it.
Yeah, it's freaking amazing. We just had a
Yes.
show last night that you can check out by going to the Storm Chasing Q&A playlist on our YouTube channel, where one of the founders, John Bangoff, who's a coach here at Storm Chaser Coaching, went through all the new stuff they just released. He answered questions. You'll get a really good idea whether or not Weatherfront is a product that you want to actually pay for. I think you'll want to after you watch it, but that's there for you to check out as well. So, end of the upsell. Cameron, is there anything else on today's setup that you wanted to mention?
Yeah, let's just throw up some cams to see how they. We'll just look at the broad array and just see how things can pan out. I'll look at the her first. Will probably be least enthusiastic about the triple point since it really does not like that dry air mass. Even if you get a supercell here, looks like it splits there. And then up in Minnesota, Iowa does show some mini supercells later on in the afternoon, primarily in Minnesota. And you can see a trailing cold fronty looking thing too. Our favorite, I'll just do the V2 Rufus. Similar story, breaks out a little bit more storms along that triple point area. Again, this might actually be a potential failure mode for the triple point. Then it also shows some kind of convection up here in Minnesota. A lot of these cams are thinking that front stays up in Minnesota, not quite Iowa, for sure. And then I'll look at the NAM. Again, it shows what I think could be an ideal scenario before storms end up growing upscale. Maybe not too hot on the Minnesota-Iowa play, but I definitely still think that's possible.
Let's leave on this, Cameron. Let's say somebody is sitting there in between both of these targets. What would they be looking for throughout the day as the atmosphere evolves to tip the scales one way or the other and help them decide which mode they should actually be going after?
Yeah, personally, I think I would have a little bit more of a dog in the southern play, simply because I think the ceiling on that play could be a little bit higher. It's a much drier and higher Cape air mass. That said, I would definitely be watching for how much convergence actually happens up in Minnesota. It's really possible that this kind of sagging front really is not enough to spark any storms. And hence you see some of the cams do actually struggle to form convection. I sadly don't think there's really much data that we can gain that will tell us if this is going to boom or bust. As far as I at least know about how these setups work, they are very finicky and very hard to predict.
Remember to check out those links in the description below and then watch another video.